After pressing, some would say pressuring Republicans for months to oppose any mass release of government records on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, President Trump abruptly changed course this week, just days before lawmakers voted this past week to make the records public. Now, Representative Thomas Massey, who's a Republican, his resolution ordering the Department of Justice to publicly disclose all unclassified record documents, communications, and investigative materials it possesses that relate to Epstein and also his accomplice, Maxwell. I must admit, you got to give credit to Republicans Bo Barrett, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Nancy Mace, who also voted along with Massey and Democrats and many Republicans to sign the discharge petition. Now, you must understand, it was begrudging on the president's part to go ahead with this because dozens of other House Republicans made it clear to the president that they would actually favor this bill. And there are these long claims to be Republican conspiracy theory, the existence of the Epstein files, which supposedly contain incriminating information about major political figures' associations with the now deceased Epstein, was pushed by Democrats. You know, I had a chance, and I'm so glad we have Scott Bolden, celebrated international lawyer, commentator, and just a clear thinker, former chair of the Democratic Party here in Washington, D.C., joining us today. You know, I tell you, I read so many of those pages, there's 20,000, and I was really struck by a few things. The fact that, you know, Liz Cheney, somebody I have a lot of respect for because her father was a mentor to me in my early days in Washington, D.C., how she worked with Representative Benny Thompson to share those documents with Jack Smith. It surprised me. It also surprised me about Larry Summers, who was very close to Epstein, and Epstein was procuring women for him and helping him in his adulterous affairs, and they found it funny, and he saw Epstein as his wingman. And now all these organizations are demanding that Summers step down, and then you go to the Caribbean, where lawmakers, where Epstein actually had holdings, and the lawmakers were told that he was trafficking women, but yet he contributed to the campaigns, and even during the Cohen hearings, he was texting these members of Congress. They were feeding them questions to ask. I mean, there's just no clean hands here, everybody. Yeah. But the point is, all this was a transaction. There were no deep, meaningful relationships here. All a transaction to exploit just underage girls, just sexual trafficking. No different than what you see in the churches with the Catholic Church that we condemn, and it continues. You have these grown, powerful people, this fetish with young girls. And I so admired Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, look, it's not about condemning you, Mr. President. There's nothing in it that indicts you. It's about, as a woman, standing up for these young victims.
Yeah, I don't know what's in those files vis-a-vis Donald Trump. I do know that he's the only, he and the White House were really the only group of people, or group, that was fighting the release of these Epstein files. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, given how horrific this sex trafficking is. I've done a lot of work in this space internationally. As you know, I'm a white-collar criminal defense lawyer, and I'll be honest with you, I can't think of one reason why the president would not want these files out. His MAGA base wants it. Democrats wanted it. And by the way, Democrats spent 4 years before Jeffrey Epstein killed himself prosecuting he and Ghislaine Maxwell and others and doing their investigation. So, but I don't think it's a political issue. Sexual trafficking and the horrificness of it all, if that's a word, you get my point. It touched on so many of these young women lives, but what's worse, if there can be something worse, is the sheer corruption, the cover-up, and the conspiracy engaged in by the men where these women were being supplied to them, whether it's Larry Summers, whether it's Bill Clinton, whether it's Trump. you know, what's interesting about what else is in those files is that Jeffrey Epstein believed in the emails back and forth that Trump knew about the sex trafficking.
So let me interrupt you just on that.
Well,
And
that's true or not.
No, I just want to say that. But I do realize that Trump was one of the few in a video who condemned Epstein, who said he was dangerous, said he was involved in trafficking, and that he would soon be found out. And they did sever that relationship.
Yeah, but
fairness to the
he
president.
also, and credit to the president, that's fine.
Yeah.
But also, Jeffrey Epstein said something similar about Donald Trump. He is the Trump that we have not heard from. Donald is dirty as they can be, and he knows I know how dirty he is. So you have all these like smoking gun statements between both sides. But this is power and influence at the highest levels. You know, the running common theme between white-collar criminals and those who operate at the highest echelons of power in this country and elsewhere is that the rules simply don't apply to them. That they thought it was okay not to just traffic young women, right? But there was an incredible sense of entitlement. That's a running theme with all of my white-collar criminal defendants. Entitlement, the laws don't apply, and get me as little time as possible so I can get my freedom and get back to doing something that feeds my entitlement, if you will. And so there are no winners in any of this. I do think that the victims ought to be naming names, but with these files coming out, redacted or not, we ought to find out a lot more about this.
Help our audience to understand that the only thing that will be shared are the estate files. Not all files will be revealed to the public.
Right. Well, some of those files are on the grand jury seal,
yes. And
the judges have said, I don't see a public reason why all of these documents that were put into the grand jury, that's going to remain secretive. You might come out in 10 or 20 years when many of the witnesses and others have passed on, but those files won't be there. But the estate files will certainly be there. And whatever's been turned over to the House and Senate, those files will be there. And this isn't, remember, there are tens of thousands of pages that have been released already. Let's not forget about
selectively
that.
Released.
Selectively released. So now, if I read the order right and I read what the legislation says, the resolution, or the discharge resolution, is that whatever DOJ has that's not in the grand jury and wasn't put in the grand jury, those files will be released. Whatever the House and Senate investigation committees, those will be released. And you will have large groups of people, whether it's the media, politics, business, all of them combing through, have teams combing through to see whether they have any exposure.
Let me pivot, because another very important topic, the harshness of the judge and how the lawyers handled the Comey case.
Yeah.
To the point where there's a possibility it may just be tossed out.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
Well, so you don't come up with a defendant and then go find a crime against him.
Right.
You get a set of facts, and then you follow the facts where they take you in an investigation, and then you indict or you present to a grand jury, and technically you're supposed to present all exculpatory and inculpatory evidence to a grand jury.
Would you also say this also applies to Tish James? The Attorney General in New York.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't apply to John Bolden. In fact, everyone says that seems to be the only case where there's really clear evidence for an indictment.
And we know there are frontline prosecutors who have been investigating Bolden for 4 years.
Right.
There may be something there. He's innocent until proven guilty, but that started under the Biden administration.
Correct.
Here, you have so much evidence of the president directing DOJ to investigate and to prosecute these people. In both cases, you have what we call declination memos, whereby frontline assistant district attorneys or frontline assistant U.S. attorneys have said, we've investigated, we can't prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, and under DOJ guidelines.
And some have resigned.
And some have resigned as a result.
Yeah.
You just saw
we're
with
talking about
the judge.
Trump attorneys that have resigned.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of the
Exactly.
integrity issue.
Of
For them,
course.
yeah.
See, you know, you and I have talked about this. My dad was a judge, and the media talks about conservative judges, liberal judges, who was appointed at the federal level, who was appointed to the Supreme Court. Whether you're conservative or liberal, and me and my father used to talk about this all the time, you still have to have a factual pathway and a legal pathway to a conclusion of law. So, of an opinion. So, if you can't get there factually or legally, I don't care how conservative you are. You can be Rehnquist, right? You're going to have to call the shots because you have a judicial code of ethics. In this particular case, you saw the judge in Comey's case, ripped into the U.S. Attorney, the Eastern District of Virginia, ripped into DOJ and say, based on what I've reviewed of the grand jury proceedings, the defense never gets that, right? She ordered them to give them those documents to the defense because it's relevant, probative, and material to their defense that this, on the 12B, this was vindictive prosecution, selective prosecution, and they may have even misrepresented what they presented to the grand jury. I can't tell you how powerfully unusual that is for a sitting federal judge to order those documents to be handed over to the defendant. And Donald Trump doesn't help. Every time he opens his mouth
asked for all the
about that,
evidence.
That's right.
Everything.
Ahead of time.
Ahead of time.
Before they get going. So
Yes.
I don't think those prosecutions are going to go well. Now, the federal government, they can appeal the court's decision if they dismiss. There are only a handful of decisions where the courts have said, I'm going to dismiss this indictment based on vindictive or selective prosecution. And most of those cases, especially coming out of the Fourth Circuit, where Virginia is, have been done post-trial, where the government has tried to add on charges to a conviction, and then the defense has filed those motions. Never before.
You are convinced that this is retaliatory prosecution.
Well, you got to believe the president's words. I mean, the president said that as much, and that doesn't help his prosecutors whatsoever. He'd be better off being quiet about it and just letting this thing run its course. But of course, he hates Tish James because Tish James sued him and for millions and multiple millions of dollars and won.
Well, he hates his enemies, his perceived enemies.
His perceived enemies. But politics. Well, what do we know about politics? It doesn't apply to Donald Trump. Politics is there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies.
Why is it that
Why
is it that it doesn't apply to the president?
Because the president, his mentality is to fight. His mentality is not political. Remember, he's a real estate developer. What does a developer do? They develop property, they develop buildings and stuff. They start with a lot of partners, and then eventually they only get down to one or two partners, and the rest of them fall away.
Transactional relationship.
It's transactional relationships.
We'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams. When we come back, Steve Laffey will join the conversation. And welcome back to the broadcast. What's happening, Steve?
Riveted by your conversation. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you. So listen, you've always said the president's tariffs were not working. It's all about the pocketbook issues. Here's what shocks me. Immediately when Trump took the tariffs off coffee, bananas, other food products, the prices dropped immediately. I was told by experts that even if he were to change courses on tariffs, it would take time before the consumer would see the effect of it. What happened?
Well, the invisible hand of Adam Smith works really well, really quickly when you take off the tariffs. So yes, I mean, a lot of prices have been inflated, maybe a little bit artificially, but also, unfortunately for President Trump, a lot of this goes against his national emergency stuff, the erratic behavior about tariffs that you and I talked about in January. continues, where they go up, they go down, and we can talk about China, but they're not really about national defense. They're not really about an emergency, much of them. They're about his transactional, to use the word from the previous segment, transactional way of doing business. And they've hurt the American consumer, and they've hurt us with our allies and haven't really helped us with our enemies. That's the problem. He really should have focused in on only communist China. They're our problem. Canada is our greatest ally. They held some of the hostages in Iran. We had a system all set up where we run the game, and so people kind of have to obey as long as we don't abuse it. But when you say you're going to attack, Greenland maybe, or take Greenland when the country's in a NATO country, or you don't know what you're going to do about tariffs here and there, about Porsche cars that goes back and forth, you're really hurting the ability of American consumers to make decisions, and they need certainty, and businesses do too. Today, Ford Motor Company is talking about how the fact they can't find enough workers. I think the president understands that. He's questioning what's happened with immigration and tariffs and so forth on some of the bigger plants like Hyundai and getting real workers in. He's done some great things on education, but this tariff stuff is going to hurt him. And I still think there's an 80% chance, not 100, that the Supreme Court actually rules against him.
Oh, I think you're correct. Let me just stay with you a minute, because I know many Americans across our nation are getting very excited about Trump's determination to give you $2,000 each if you meet a certain financial threshold. Let me tell you something. That is more unlikely than likely. And Steve, could you tell we the people why?
Well, one, the Congress won't pass it. Two, we've already tried this trick, and we had inflation.
Trick? Wait a minute. Did you call it a trick?
I do call it a trick, because I heard the Secretary of the Treasury the question about what the $2,000 were, and he went to the beautiful tax bill, and he talked about the $2,000 was probably already in no tax on tips, depreciation, taking a tax write-off on automobiles. All these things I disagree with, by the way. But he's already talked about it sort of being the $2,000 for low-income people. But we can't keep sending checks. Plus, we're taking in a couple of $100 billion in tariff income. We can't send out $500 billion. The bond market won't allow it. The Congress won't vote for it because the president is now weaker because of what's happened with Marjorie Greene and what's happened with his reversal that you and I talked about 8 months ago, that there was about the list and about Pam Bondi and why this was a disaster for the president. And we still don't understand why he waited to the end to change his mind. But he's weakened, and he'll get weaker and weaker, because guess what, Mr. President? You announced that you weren't on the ballot in these disastrous elections a couple of weeks ago, but you're not on the ballot in 2026. You're not on the ballot ever again. And so people will stop fleeing like the little rats that much of them have been in the Republican Party, because they've just been sycophants, as you mentioned yesterday. They've been sycophants. Instead of passing legislation, getting the president on board on certain really important things to enlarge the middle class. They have failed, and now they'll flee.
Scott, you and I would agree that there's a lot of fraud in food stamps and SNAP, that it needs to be revamped. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But then the president's saying that we're going to shut it down and everybody has to reapply again. Talk about the ramifications of that.
Well, the fraud, waste, and abuse that politicians like to talk about, it's a fraction of what's wrong with the system. If you don't like the SNAP benefits, if you don't like entitlements, 10 to 20% maybe, and 20% will be an outlier. You could change all of that, if you will, and you should work on that. But the other 80%, 90% are just people struggling and that they need help. We are a social welfare state. And so you can try to, the president likes to just go across the board. He has no nuance whatsoever. He doesn't do the homework to see how all of these policies, whether it's economic terrorism with the tariffs, or whether it's not fighting for SNAP benefits when the government is shut down, whether it's not sitting down with the Democrats to talk with them about health care and Medicare benefits and improving the quality of life of others vis-a-vis Obamacare may be imperfect, but 20 million Americans have it. Let's make it better. Why do you have to wait to open the government to talk about that? You could have spent those 45, 50 days talking about that and coming up with some resolution. But we're so tribal in our government now that most Americans suffer and are going to suffer. And so that's why he says everybody has to reapply. It's not practical. He says everybody who's here illegally, whether they're criminals or not, have to go back and have to be put out. And everything is very aggressive and very public. But that's hurting our economy when you're throwing people out who are waiting on their hearings. Sure, let's get rid of the criminals, the rapists, the murderers. Absolutely. You'll see that. But even in communities that are Trump strongholds, the people who are working hard, paying taxes, and are waiting on a hearing, rightfully or wrongfully, they came here illegally, you've seen blowback on that, because at our core, we are Americans and we understand due process. We may not understand it legally, conceptually, but we got a gut feeling, most of us who love this country.
So here's what I want to discuss. You know, Bill Pulte, everybody knows that name, who's proposing to propose to the president a 50-year mortgage. I don't know anybody in their right mind that would want to be paying a mortgage in their 80s and 90s. Let me just say.
But it helps the banks. It helps the banks.
I'm talking about what helps the consumer. Talk about what Bill Pulte is proposing to the president, Steve Laffey, the pros and cons of it, and why he's getting such pushback in Republican circles to the point where they want him terminated.
Well, the 50-year mortgage makes no sense. Number one, the rate of interest you will pay when you go to get your first mortgage will be based upon the 10-year bond yield in U.S. Treasury. Mm-hmm. Why? Because people stay in the homes roughly 10 years. Right now it's about 11.8 years because of low interest rates from previous administrations and the Fed. So number two, what we want, and so we don't have a 2008 disaster, is that you, the homeowner, have skin in the game. So we want you to put down 20% when you buy your first home. Therefore, prices don't go down 20%. And we also want you to build up equity and live the American dream. If you live 10 years in a 50-year mortgage and you want to sell, you might have in a $400,000 mortgage, you might, I don't have the numbers in front of me, I could calculate them quickly, but you might have a little bit more equity. But in a 30-year and a 15 or a 10-year mortgage, you have now paid much more down in principal than in interest. So these are the two big reasons. First of all, these are things we're not going to do. So we keep talking about things that we're not going to do. And Mr. Pulte, who seems to be not that qualified to be in his job and doing another version of finding selectively Democrats he can present to the president who might have done something wrong on their mortgage applications, right? These things just aren't going to happen. Instead of finding really big things, signature things for the president we talked about in January, that would be like his way of looking back and saying, look what I did. Right. He's now, because of his transactional attitude, all over the place. Great job in Israel, in many respects, with Iran. Things that he's always done a pretty good job in the Middle East, right? Moving the embassy, all these things he did in the first and second term. But other than that, it's a real problem to find things that
I want to raise this with you because I know we're going to run out of time here. You know, he mentioned the Middle East. We just saw earlier in the week the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia here. You had aircraft jets flying over. You had the top brass military. And it was an unofficial visit. What was going on? I mean, I understand what they did for the president when he was there, but my goodness, they rolled out the carpet. What's at stake here, Scott?
Yeah, well, Saudi Arabia has got a lot of human rights issues that America has to deal with or has not dealt with appropriately, but be that as it may, they're still a very stable country in the Middle East. They want to be the counterweight to Iran with the president. We have military, financial, and significant business interests with them, and so they're still an ally, notwithstanding the human rights issues that they have, notwithstanding the political suppression that are part of their politics.
Trump, they made clear that Trump also, they have no interest in signing the Abraham Accords and to be an ally to Israel. That's something the president is pushing.
Yeah, but he hasn't given up on that. Just like he hasn't given up on ending the Russian-Ukraine war, if you will. He has ended the Israeli war with Hamas and what have you, and while there were delays, he did get that done. Now, there are other things that he hadn't gotten done, but you know, in politics and every other part of your life, hope springs eternal, and so we'll see. But you know, it's a tortured relationship with Saudi Arabia, and it's going to remain that way because of what Saudi Arabia stands for, what they've done, what they haven't done. But more importantly, America needs them as an ally.
You've been
Saudi
there, right?
Arabia. Yeah,
you've been there.
Absolutely. So
what
is
is
a
it
very
like? What is it
different
like?
society. Well, women are driving now, that's for sure.
Oh, what progress!
And
Okay.
my firm just opened up an office there, and it's a growing business hub in the Middle East. It really is.
Especially sports, for sports as well.
Sports and what have you, and live, and so.
But they buy everything. They can buy everything.
That's okay. That's okay. Nothing wrong with money. As a Democrat, nothing wrong with money now. I love money. I want lower taxes. I'm a business Democrat. So, you know, the far left and far right hate me because I'm in the middle like most of America. But it's a really dynamic place, and it's a dynamic business piece that has a lot of growth on its side, similar to UAE, but they're very different countries. Very different countries.
Listen, Steve Laffey, Scott Bolden, I can't thank you guys enough for this Saturday, November 22nd conversation about what really matters in America. I'm going to stay with you guys. I think that's what they're telling me? Okay, you're not going anywhere. See? There you go. I'm having too much fun. We'll be back with our guests.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Hello, America. I'm Dee Dee Bass-Wilbon, reporting for the Armstrong-Williams Show from the National Mall. Today, the power of gratitude. As we enter the Thanksgiving season, we ask Americans which freedoms they are most grateful for.
I would say freedom of speech. I really do think that I'm really grateful for that, especially with being in a community where we can have differing opinions and perspectives on things. All of us coming from different backgrounds, families, and upbringings, but we have that opportunity to discuss and have those diverse topics.
I would say the freedom for religion. I'm obviously wearing a Charlie Kirk shirt here. I believe a lot in the same values that he expressed during his life. So I'm really glad that I, just as some random guy on the street, have the freedom to put on a shirt that I like and to go have reasonable conversations with people.
I would say one of the freedoms I'm most thankful for is the freedom to gather. The freedom to assemble, because I do that all the time with church. I'm a Christian, so that's very important to me. How does that make me feel? It makes me feel like I'm in a place where everyone is celebrated and everyone can enjoy the things they enjoy together. And that's a wonderful thing.
Being grateful, even grateful for the blessings of liberty, can have a positive impact on your health.
But gratitude literally changes how the body functions. When you feel thankful, the brain releases serotonin and dopamine, and we call those the happy neurotransmitters. So they're natural mood stabilizers. And these chemicals calm the stress centers in the brain. They activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the kind of rest and repair nervous system. But in rest and repair, your blood pressure starts to fall, and even inflammation eases, and the immune system actually strengthens. So, gratitude isn't just good for your mood, it helps the body heal and it helps you age more slowly.
From science to the streets, the message is clear. Gratitude for our American rights isn't just patriotic, it's a daily choice that lowers stress, strengthens the heart, and lifts the spirit. It doesn't ignore our challenges, it gives us the strength to face them. I'm Dee Bass-Wilbon, grateful to be an American, and grateful to you for watching the Armstrong-Williams Show.
I really love that because, this is Thanksgiving week coming up, and, we pray for those that won't have food on the table. They worry about their loved ones. We think about the people in Jamaica, how they continue to suffer from the storm, but still in all that we have so much to be thankful for and so much gratitude. I want to come back to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. One of the things that we did not discuss yet, Steve, is that it makes all the sense for the Crown Prince because, listen, he's been isolated from the world since the murder of Khashoggi, who was a freelance writer for the Washington Post. This is really the first time that he's really been back in the public on the world stage, and Trump has given him that platform again. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate. I don't think we should give someone of that ilk that kind. It's totally fine for the president to meet with them, but I don't think what they're doing today makes sense. I don't think we should sell them the F-35s to be on equal par with Israel. I imagine that the reason we're doing this is about oil again. Saudi Arabia and many of these countries, it's really about oil. Trump would like inflation to come down. Oil prices down 13% year over year. It's one of the big victories. And that eventually the price of oil feeds into all these different products, plastics, cars, whatever it might be. And so he really needs, especially what happened a couple of weeks ago with the elections, he needs the affordability message that the Democrats played on the candidates very, very well to go away by next November, or it's going to be a disaster. So that's why we're doing it, I think. And when you talk Saudi Arabia, you might as well just talk about oil. But as our other guest mentioned, I am for human rights first and foremost, as a Christian. And the fact that it never gets brought up is very troubling to me in this administration. So we can do a lot of things with Saudi Arabia. Yes, they are a buttress for what we need done against Iran in many respects. And Trump's doing maybe he's walking the middle ground with this. Maybe he's doing the best he can. But I find it very troubling to have this kind of a celebration and then to tell the guy from Canada to get out of the office. I find it very...
Scott, for a moment this week, X and a lot of our websites did not work because the website infrastructure company Cloudflare went down. And man, what a huge impact. Mm-hmm. We saw something with Amazon a few weeks ago. This continues. At what cost, though?
Well, we become so interdependent on the internet and all the mechanisms that allow us to have that internet. As recent as this morning, Cloudflare was blocking my access to a media outlet that I was trying to read an article on. So that's still going on. AI will not necessarily help that, at least not at this point. And AI, many companies of the tech companies are investing billions of dollars in AI. I think we have a bubble. If we don't, we're going to get that bubble. And so we've got to put some reliability standards in place so that we don't have these major downfalls, these major interruptions. Because the bigger you get, right, and the more sophisticated you get, and hackers are always out there, right, the more is at risk, whether it's our energy grid, whether it's our electric grid, whether it's our resources, you name it, but simply communicating with one another. You don't have the telephone to pick up anymore. You know, my bell's not there anymore. You pick up your phone, you get on the internet, you do text, you got cellular, or you got Wi-Fi. You jack up Wi-Fi or cellular, everything stops moving in this country. That's too much reliability, but I'm not sure what the answer is other than creating a more reliable system, if you will.
You know, I do want to say this, and I know that some people can relate to it and others really just don't care. You know, it's been a bloody week this week on the stock market on Wall Street. Let me tell you something. There's so much blood. I'm bloody. You cannot see it, but let me tell you, it's been a bloodbath.
Hold on.
That's what it is. Hold on. Bloodbath.
Hold on.
I want to tell you. But I want to mention this for both of you. And I know it is something that Scott can really relate to, and I know it's probably something that it's very troubling to Steve Laffey. You know, when our president publicly chastised Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, a lawmaker who has been one of his fiercest and most loyal defenders, and get a load of this, she didn't really say anything negative about him. She wanted to defend the women, and she wanted to protect people in her district, in the rural district, from how you just totally shut down Obamacare. Because listen, a lot of rural hospitals are shut down. A lot of these patients cannot get to these hospitals. The distance has become too far, has gone too far. But this has raised eyebrows really across the political world, especially among Republicans, because Greene is no fringe admirer. She's been an unwavering ally, a constant amplifier of Trump's agenda, and one of his most dependable loyalists on Capitol Hill. And for Trump to take aim at someone, Scott and Steve, who has carried his banner so faithfully is not just surprising, in my opinion, is very revealing, and this is why. The GOP under Trump has always been a coalition held together by its energy, the grievance, and a sense of this shared purpose. But coalitions, even fearsome ones, require space. And Scott, you understand this with the Democratic Party. You got to have internal disagreement. You got to have room for ideological variance, strategic differences in both parties, and the occasional inter-party critique is important. And without that space, I think you realize a movement begins to cannibalize its own allies. And what happens here, you mistake loyalty for uniformity and criticism for betrayal. And listen, no politician is above criticism, no elected official. But Trump's instinct, Steve, to swat down dissent rather than engage it, risk weakening the very movement he now leads, the MAGA movement. Loyalty, Scott, can be a very powerful political glue, but when it becomes the only acceptable currency, leaders often find themselves, and I tell you, surrounded not by allies, but by sycophants afraid to say what needs to be said.
And with that will be the downfall of any organization historically. And I think you're seeing currently the Republican Party experiencing some of that or getting their sea legs on some of this. I mean, the horrific bad acts committed by Epstein and Donald Trump not wanting to release those, release those files, the impact on rural America, white America, poor working class Americans, regardless of their race or color. You're seeing these individuals on the Hill, they've still got to get elected. And so loyalty is one thing. It costs you expertise with who you put as head of these various agencies, but these people still have to get elected. And as a result, remember, he's got one term. He's essentially a lame duck. And I think if the Republicans lose the House in 2026, you're going to see the Republicans, I think, not being as blindly loyal to Donald Trump vis-a-vis, this is a movement, this is a cult movement based on grievance, but getting the reality check. So for example, getting a reality check and say, well, I'm not doing that because that makes no sense. That's going to hurt the economy. That's going to hurt health care. Then that begs the question, what happens after Donald Trump? What happens after 2028? Who's going to carry that mantle? Who has the personality and the magnetism to continue to lead this movement called MAGA and Trumpism? I don't think there's one person out there in the political mix on the Republican side that has the power and the personality and the drive and respect of the Republican Party beyond Donald Trump. And he can't be there forever, and he's not going to be there forever.
And I want to say this as I thank Steve and Scott for joining us today. If the Republican Party becomes a place where even its most vocal supporters fear diverging from the president on strategy, policy, or political direction, then it will slowly constrict its own capacity for growth. And you cannot build a lasting governing coalition, one capable of winning swing states, persuading independents, or broadening its democratic appeal if the internal expectation is an ideological lockstep and zero deviation. You just cannot win. Listen, I cannot thank you both for joining us. When we come back, Sam Faddis will join us on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Sam Faddis, it's interesting, your conversation with Dr. Steve Hatfield and whether MAGA has lost the war, and when you say has lost the war, Big Pharma is fighting back.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems that way, Armstrong. I mean, Dr. Hatfield is one of the top virologists in the entire world and has been a critic of mRNA vaccines and the COVID response for years. And when he was brought into this administration under RFK Jr. at HHS as a top medical advisor, it was a really good sign to me. And I think he was instrumental in getting funding cut, government funding cut for a lot of mRNA vaccines. And then sort of immediately thereafter, after that success, he was shown the door and told his services were no longer required. And in fact, he returned to work at HS and found his card didn't work to access the building anymore. And I think it's pretty clear to me, my opinion, that the problem is that he was affecting the bottom line of some very powerful companies and powerful people.
And what bottom line was that?
Well, look, the whole business of mRNA vaccines, COVID vaccines, but more broadly now being trotted out for a whole bunch of diseases, is an almost unbelievably lucrative business. I think it was Moderna, if memory serves, after their vaccine, COVID vaccine, was created, there were like 9 different people on the board of directors of Moderna who became brand new billionaires. You're talking trillions of dollars into the future here. So when you start moving in the direction of not only cutting off government funding for these vaccines, but potentially outlawing them, you're going right to the heart of the matter. And I think this goes along with my general theme that MAGA will only be allowed to get so far in draining the swamp or changing permanent Washington. And when they really begin to get to something that somebody really cares about, they're going to get shut down.
But I assume, though, that this is not coming from HHS's Secretary Bobby Kennedy. It's coming from a higher place.
Well, I think the smart money suspects that it is coming from Susie Wiles, who was the campaign manager for Trump and is the chief of staff, and that's based on the fact that she has long-standing connections as a lobbyist for Pfizer and other big pharma entities. In the case of Dr. Hatfield specifically, as I understand it from having talked to him at length, he has yet to hear from RFK Jr. at all. He was not contacted by RFK Jr. when he was fired, and as of yesterday was the last time I spoke to him, he hadn't heard from him at all. So where, look, I have nothing but respect for RFK Jr. in terms of his fight against big pharma and for medical freedom and so forth, and he's been a man of courage for a long time. So I can only speculate as to where he stands. I mean, I would imagine it's entirely possible that he's increasingly isolated, hanging on, trying to do what he can.
Sam, you described the H-1B visa as a direct war on American labor. What makes this issue so urgent?
Look, the H-1B visa is supposed to be, and this is what all the proponents will tell you, a mechanism by which American businesses can bring in foreigners, get them visas to come work, who have certain specialized skills. So you really need to fill a niche, and you can't find anybody in the States to do it. You can bring these folks in. That's nonsense. That's not true. That's a lie. Virtually all of these visas go to people who come in primarily in the IT business, and they work very basic level, entry level jobs. Nothing exotic. It's not one guy on the planet could do it. It's routine. And in fact, typically they come in and they replace American workers already in place who are required to train their foreign replacements. So why would we do that? Why are we bringing in people from India, first and foremost, to take these jobs? Because they will work for less money, and because they're essentially on a leash. Because you got a visa, and if you cause trouble, the man will send you home. The visa is obtained by the company, so on your behalf, and they can pull that and send you home. So you're about a step above being a slave, quite frankly, because you will take whatever money they give you and subject to whatever conditions. They can work you as hard as they want, ignore whatever rules they want. And if you complain, again, there's 50,000 other guys in line behind you, and they will send you home. So,
well, the interesting thing about it, they don't complain because they know they're standing on shallow ground. They know exactly what the consequences are. That's why they're hired in the first place. Are large corporations abusing loopholes, Sam, following up on what you just stated, to replace American workers with cheaper foreign labor? And what industries are most impacted? Tech, engineering, healthcare, or all of the above?
Well, all of the above, but the lion's share of these people work in IT. And basically, if you go into one of these giant companies, Google, Facebook, Meta, whatever they call it these days, what you'll find is sort of at the factory floor level, equivalent, if you will, at that basic working level, you may find that essentially everybody sitting there is an Indian who was brought here on an H-1B visa, all of whom replaced Americans. Now, they don't typically then get moved up. They don't advance. They are worked horrific hours. And again, they replace Americans that were already in those positions. And then you have a handful of contract companies that have cornered the market on this. So these folks, Google doesn't go to India and find their own people. Google contracts with some big company in India, a contract company, and that's all they do. They make massive amounts of money off of supplying this labor. But of course, there's another dimension here, which is coming from a place like India, and this is not a reflection on Indians as individuals, just the system. A lot of the degrees that these guys supposedly have are completely fraudulent. They literally, some cases they buy them from universities that don't even exist. In other cases, they just pay somebody at a university to hand them a diploma. I mean, one university alone that over the last, 10 years has issued something like 40,000 fraudulent degrees. You pay them, you just buy a degree from them and you have no
But
skill.
how does the skill set plays out here in this country once that person is hired?
Well, when they come over, honestly, They are typically employed at a level where the skill necessary is so basic that you don't even necessarily need to have a bachelor's degree, but that is a requirement of the visa procedure. So that's why they have to.
Oh, and it's a workaround. It's a workaround.
They got to check that box. But again, everybody, the Americans are getting shafted, but so are these guys. These guys are brought here and worked into the ground, horrific hours, paid virtually nothing. And if you complain, if you even think about demanding your actual rights as a worker, well, boom, you're on a plane back to Delhi, so fast your head is spinning.
Well, I got to interrupt you again. The question begs itself is whether the H-1B program is being used as intended, or has it become a tool for exploitation? And how much responsibility does Congress bear for allowing this system to persist as it is now?
There's no question it is completely being abused. It is not being used as intended. It is being completely exploited, and anybody who's actually taken the time to dig into it knows that. Does Congress bear responsibility? Yeah, look, those folks that are out there saying that we ought to do away with this entirely, I think are right on the money. There is no reason on God's green earth that we got to be importing people from abroad, that this special technique, this special mechanism so that we can take away employment from Americans. And if we need to train more Americans, then let's train more American citizens, right? This is exploitation of the American worker.
I find this conversation fascinating because I am going to India the first week in December to broadcast from there. So this is like I'm in the classroom. I mean, what reform, Sam, would immediately protect us and the United States workers without, let's say, compromising innovation?
I don't think there is any downside to the United States as an entity, to the American people as a whole, of completely eliminating this. Who profits from this? Not the American who had to train the Indian to take his job away, and not the Indian who comes here and then is basically at best an indentured servant, right? Just eliminate the program.
Are you concerned about concerned about any national security risk given your background in intelligence?
Well, look, anytime you're bringing in folks that are not American citizens, that becomes part of the issue. But honestly, there's almost like a class system here. Most of these guys, overwhelmingly, don't come here and then progress on to the upper ranks. In the article we wrote about this, I embedded one YouTube video, a Chinese-American gentleman talking about his experience as a senior guy in IT, how there's like this ethnic class distinction. Like if you're down at the factory floor level, my term, it's all Indians in the room.
Sam, unfortunately, I'm out of time, but man, this is a business. It's a business for India as well as the United States. I want to thank Scott and Steve Laffey for joining us earlier, but man, this is a thriving business, and it's corrupt.
Yes, it is.
My goodness, it's corrupt. A lot of people. Listen, thank you guys. I'm Armstrong Williams. We're out of here. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.